How do we read a book? The answer seems obvious. We open the cover and we look at the pages. We sound out the words and we look at the pictures until we get to the end. The problem is that if we slow down our reading style, if we examine each page for its details, and if we discover that each page is a poem and that each poem creates its own meaning, we soon find that reading a book is potentially an endless endeavor. Worse, I've suggested since the beginning of this course that documents achieve their own independence as they leave their creator's hands, and thus a book not only contains many individual poems, but also travels its own journey to be read by different people in different contexts, and thus to produce ever more interpretations. A book opens up on a labyrinth of interpretation. Books, however, contain their own instructions for use, and if we focus in on one part of a book, it will provide us a map to that labyrinth. Books teach us how to read. As our first extended comic book, Maus has much to teach us about reading. Thus, for this lecture, I will take on one part of Maus to explore the issue of reading by tracing its relationship to the whole. You may read Maus on your own to deepen your understanding and draw your own readings out, but my argument is that slow reading is a process of taking a book one step at a time, of identifying and of synthesizing its details. And so you can follow this lecture simply by paying attention to the parts of the book I discuss. Maus, in fact, contains books within it. One story it contains is Prisoner on the Hell Planet. Prisoner on the Hell Planet was referenced on the copyright page, just below the list of dates in which Maus was serialized in Raw magazine, and it first appeared in the 1973 underground anthology Short Order Comics. In Maus, Vladik's second wife, Mala, mentions that he, Vladik, discovered the comic and read it. And on page 99 of Maus, Artie the Mouse actually takes up a copy of the comic book. With the turn to page 100 of Maus, we hold that copy in our hands. The situation is intriguing because we're in the position of Artie the Mouse reading a representation of the earlier comic book that is in fact materially reprinted within Maus. Our very act of reading is suddenly part of the story itself. And so we read the page. Prisoner on the Hell Planet, a case history. Trojan Lake, New York, 1958. In 1968, when I was 20, my mother killed herself. She left no note. My father found her when he got home from work, her wrists slashed and an empty bottle of pills nearby. Oi Gott! I was living with my parents, as I agreed to do, on my release from the state mental hospital 3 months before. I just spent the weekend with my girlfriend, Isabella. My parents didn't like her. I was late getting home. I suppose that if I'd gotten home when expected, I would have found her body. When I saw the crowd, I had a pang of fear. I suspected the worst, but didn't let myself know. The page is a tour de force. The first thing we realize is that if, as I've been arguing, that Maus overall is a story of paternity, of a man's relationship to his father and to his father's stories of the Holocaust, then Prisoner on the Hell Planet is a story of maternity, of a man's relationship to his mother, to her suicide. In fact, the page breaks with Maus in a number of ways, for no sooner does it offer the fiction that we are Artie the Mouse reading the book, than it breaks it and suddenly gives us Artie the mustachioed comic book artist, a human being. More than that, it gives us another Artie entirely, Artie the smiling 10-year-old kid, in the true-to-life picture, hanging out with his mom, Anja, at Trojan Lake in upstate New York. All this is made worse because the mustachioed Artie is wearing a concentration camp outfit, which links us back to the main theme of Mouse, Vladek and Anjou in the concentration camp. Artie's attire is explained in the center panel of the second tier, where Spiegelman depicts himself emerging from the subway and tells us that he had been institutionalized in the state mental hospital. It seems that creating the fiction of reading breaks the bargain of the fiction of Mouse, the conceit of funny animals, and our trust that we know something about this Mr. Art Spiegelman. I would say that if this page is a poem, it is a very painful poem indeed, a poem about the breach of trust, a breach of trust between mother and son that is doubled over onto the reader who feels the breach of trust with the terms of the book. That breach of trust leads us back to the photograph, which on the face of it depicts a happy childhood at Trojan Lake. But what is the story of this namesake, Troy, but the seat of betrayal itself, the place where the Greeks' gift of a wooden horse was in fact an act of betrayal, a lie that ultimately overthrew the entire city of Troy. If we page ahead to the Prisoner of the Hell Planet's conclusion on page 103, we see that the notion of a breach of trust is exactly what this internal comic is about. The final page gives us Art's recollection of Anja. I'll read the last painful tear. Well, Mom, if you're listening, congratulations. You've committed the perfect crime. You put me here, shorted out all my circuits, cut my nerve endings, and crossed my wires. You murdered me, Mommy, and you left me here to take the rap. Pipe down, Max. Some of us are trying to sleep. Art is imprisoned in a prison tier that opens out to reveal a grid of individual cells. And he sees Anja not so much as his jailer, but as his murderer. Pausing here, I would draw together three important themes. First, this issue of a breach of trust, of course, hits at the central theme of the Holocaust, because the Jews in Nazi Germany could not believe that their community turned against them. Artie is like a concentration camp prisoner because he has inherited this past, this deep sense of betrayal as his legacy. Second, the page shows us a person we've come to know over the last 99 pages suddenly changed. When I said in my last lecture that we are not unified, I was looking ahead to this idea that even though we think we know Artie, the truth is that we do not know him. This is the legacy of the confessional and autobiographical comic proposed by Justin Green's Binky Brown Meets the Holy Virgin Mary. It is a confession that admits that the confessor does not know himself. As Spiegelman said on the first page of Prisoner on the Hell Planet, I suspected the worst, but didn't let myself know. And so he emerges from darkness, represented by the page's heavy inks and epitomized by that center panel's black hole into the ground. He emerges into a self that is shrouded in darkness. Third, I would say that the comic gives us a lesson in representation. For the reason we care about these characters enough to feel betrayed by them is because they are represented as complex and deep, the way we know human beings to be. Mouse creates them by creating a layered effect in which the mouse self holds the comics, which depicts the comic self holding a photograph of the real self who ostensibly feels imprisoned by frames. We stand over all of this, holding the book, Mouse, identified with its author. Mouse represents people through a recursive structure. Recursion means a repeated return, something that defines itself by repeatedly returning upon itself. And this is what Mouse shows us about the act of reading. In this page, we repeatedly make identifications with the characters before us, and then we find these identifications foiled or complicated by the fictional characters and the scenes in ways that we can understand and the ways that confound us, just as we discover in real life. Maus has been about representation all along. The first pages of Maus actually represent a photograph of a young Ange mouse, and Maus 2 is littered with such representations of photographs of the dead. It even begins with a picture of Art Spiegelman's brother, Richelieu, who was killed before he could be sent to the concentration camps, killed before Art Spiegelman was even born. This is because, above all, Maus is concerned with representing people, with somehow conjuring the dead from the past. Photos seem a good way of doing this, of capturing someone as they were in real life. So the photo at the beginning of the prisoner on the Hell Planet is all the more remarkable because it captures the lost people. So Maus has been about photos even when it was just a short story in the funny Aminals comic book. Spiegelman uses so many photos because he is scrupulous about what happened in Nazi Germany, because he wants to get at the honest and historical truth of the past, and so the comic book is meticulously researched. But the wisdom of Maus is that photographs, as accurate as they are not necessarily the truth. Look to page 134 of Maus. Here we see a photo of Vladek after he has escaped from his jailers. I'll read. Anja went a few times each day over to the Jewish organization, but no sign came of me. So she sat home, even more depressed, until, Anja, guess what? A letter from your husband just came. He's in Germany. He's had typhus. It's just like the gypsy said. And here's a picture of him. My God, Vladek is really alive. I passed once a photo place what had a camp uniform, a new and clean one, to make souvenir photos. Anja kept this picture always. I have it now, still now in my desk. Huh? Where you go? I need that photograph in my book. The photo is artifice. It does not capture what Vladek really looked like while he was actually forced to wear that uniform. It is a staged souvenir. In truth, comics have wrestled with photography many times over, and though photography may capture light at a certain moment, it is only another form of suspended animation, not necessarily an accurate representation of the depth and emotion and contradictions that defines an individual. I want to press this point a bit further by turning to the very last page of Maus. Throughout the book, Artie has been looking for Anju's diaries in order to understand her perspective. Vladek tells him, in the first tier of this page, after Anju died, I had to make an order with everything. These papers had too many memories, so I burned them. You burn them? Christ, you saved tons of worthless shit and you... Yes, it's a shame. For years they were laying there and nobody even looked in. The passage is linked to The Prisoner of the Hell Planet because it shows the emotional aftermath of Anja's suicide. Vladek couldn't take it, so he burned the books. This is ironic, as Artie Maus points out, because Vladek is a notorious hoarder. Indeed, Mala, his second wife, accuses him earlier in the book of being more attached to things than to people. Artie seems to understand this because when he realizes that Vladek really did burn the books, he flies into a rage. God damn you, you murderer! How the hell could you do such a thing? Ugh, to your father you yell this way. Even to your friends, you should never yell this way. But I'm telling you, after the tragedy with Mother, I was so depressed then, I didn't know if I'm coming or I'm going. I'm sorry. Look, Pop, it's getting late. I'd better go home. Come, first upstairs for a little coffee. No, really, I'd better get going right away. So, telephone to me. You should visit here more often. Don't be such a stranger. Sure, you bet. So long. Murderer. Now, murder is a crime committed against the living. Artie's logic makes sense in that those diaries, those books, are all that is left of Anja, all that is left of her story. In Artie's world, books are people. They contain the truth of people, and the truth that he uncovers in Maus is the truth of betrayal, the betrayal he feels from his mother, from his father, and from within. This betrayal is complex, but no less complex than it is true. And so my thesis is that we must read books like people. We must enter into them and find the parts that we can make deep sense of within the whole, and tie them back to what we understand of that whole. Over years, we may get to know many aspects of the book, yet it may still surprise us by changing in its depth and principles in ways we could not have foretold in our first or second or even third reading. But the larger question is, what does it mean to create books? How can one take on such a complex task? Spiegelman asked this question himself in the beginning of Maus 2. Here, Francoise Maus and Artie Maus are returning home from a trip to visit Vladek in the Catskills. I'll read from the first panel of The Last Tier. There's so much I'll never be able to understand or visualize. I mean, reality is too complex for comics. So much has to be left out or distorted. So Artie laments the process of representation. Francoise Maus gives him an answer. Just keep it honest, honey. The answer is comforting and straightforward. Yet I would pose that it also offers an elusive simplicity. As a creator, Spiegelman often depicts himself as wearing a mouse mask, as if his public self has been fundamentally shaped by writing Maus, more as if his private self has been overshadowed, obscured in some way. Thus, the question of how to read becomes more essentially, can you be honest while wearing a mask? Can you speak a truth more real than photography while crafting a persona for yourself that goes beyond yourself?